Execution scheduled for 11 p.m. But he's trying to convince us he's gone insane.
And therefore incapable of being executed.
I need you to prove he's faking it.
Edward? Let me ask you some questions.
I'm not Edward. I'm a demon.
Demons aren't really a thing.
Adam Soos here for Rebel News. While Hollywood continues to pump out progressive agenda-pushing films that no one wants to see as their box offices will frequently attest, the occasional independent film comes along and captures audiences' attentions. That's often because they are willing to tackle social, moral, and even spiritual issues that the mainstream media just won't touch. Films like 2019's Unplanned and Jim Caviezel's new film Sound of Freedom managed to both be commercial and artistic successes, and they rebuke the sentiment that the left owns the landscape of motion pictures. Another film that could be included in these ranks is the 2023 release, Nefarious. The crux of the film is hinged upon a conversation between a clinical psychiatrist and a convicted serial killer by the name of Edward Wayne Brady, who is brilliantly portrayed by Sean Patrick Flanery. Now, the conversation they're supposed to be having and the determination that's supposed to be made is whether this individual, the convicted serial killer, is fit for execution, whether he is clinically sane. But the conversation quickly turns to the question of whether or not he is possessed.
What happened to Edward?
We own him.
We?
He's a master manipulator. You have your head so twisted around you think you're the killer, not him.
Now, this film is certainly not without controversy, and not simply because of the shocking content, but because in a very interesting fashion, and in a fashion that has rubbed a number of progressives the wrong way, the potentially possessed Brady character seems to rejoice at a number of progressive sacred cows, including euthanasia and abortion, to name a few. I don't want to give too much of the film away, but many seem to be rubbed the wrong way by the sentiment of a potential demon rejoicing in those things that our modern society holds so dear. It certainly prompts some interesting questions and conversations. It's also worth noting that the depiction of Sean Patrick Flanery of demonic influence and indeed potential demonic possession within the film is just about as accurate as anything I've ever seen represented in film. And I think it's probably safe to say he'd likely be up for an Oscar if this film wasn't characterized Christian or conservative. Those are two things that progressive Hollywood certainly will not tolerate. It was my distinct pleasure to be joined by the star of the film, an actor who has well over 100 roles credited to him on IMDb, and the star of films such as Powder and the Boondock Saints films, Sean Patrick Flanery. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I guess I wanted to ask you first, what was your sort of motivation and what led you to the decision to be part of this project?
You know, at its core, it was an amazing script. You know, I don't really get an opportunity to do what I consider, you know, A-list scripts very often. I think Chuck and Carrie are two of the best writers I've ever had an opportunity to work with. I did a film with them back in 2004, and I loved every minute of working with them. When they presented me with this script, not only artistically is it something that appeals to me, but you know, the content. It's probably the most important film I've ever done. It falls in line with a lot of the things I stand for. You know, the messaging, everything. But you know, there's 5 reasons I did the film. I really would have done it for any one of those reasons, but it was a wonderful opportunity that they all came together.
Yeah. So now we've seen a bunch of major Hollywood studios sort of pushing progressive agendas, pushing films that sort of like conservative audiences might not be inclined towards, and then the box office results haven't been great. On the other side of this, however, we're seeing films like Unplanned, Sound of Freedom, God's Not Dead, Jesus Revolution, and I include Nefarious sort of among those ranks as films that are doing very well. Why do you think that there's sort of a draw or an appeal for audiences for these types of films?
I think Hollywood's pretty much out of touch. I think you know, they tend to make decisions based on their 10% of the population. And, you know, I think the numbers don't lie. You know, when films like that get a great response, I think it's painfully clear that, you know, they've missed the mark on something. It's like any other product. If a product's flying off the shelf, you need to consider your customer. You can't
Yeah.
over and over. You can't insist that they eat a certain type of bread. If it's not selling, they're not going to buy it. You have to change your messaging. You have to change the product. And right now, there's a lot of product coming out of Hollywood that people just look at and roll their eyes about.
Now, there was a time where sort of Christian films carried kind of like an assumption that they were going to be a bit maybe B grade or maybe not quite up to standards, but people were willing to render the quality because they wanted sort of moral content. They were willing to sort of suspend disbelief for a film to be morally upstanding. These films now, the new films, and I include Nefarious in that, they're both sort of stylistically like A-list type films, but then they're also tackling these issues. How important is it to bring the quality up so perhaps audiences that wouldn't conventionally consume this type of material are interested in checking it out?
Well, I think you were being very kind. In the past, faith-based films were absolute drivel. It was absolute garbage, and that's unfortunate. It's like not talking to somebody because their clothes don't look right or something. It's so you don't really understand the personality of the person. You don't really get the messaging. You don't really get the story because it's unwatchable. I think now there is certainly an uprising. I think more people are willing to take part in these films. I've never had a problem with it. Probably to my business downfall. I make decisions, that are congruent with my core. I kind of act consistently with my beliefs, and sometimes that comes back to bite you. But in the past, they've been made, they've been under budgeted. They've had, they've just been all the artists collectively haven't been, the right people, and I think the product's suffered, and I think there is a stigma now. People look into it with Nefarious. People looked into it going, oh, it's going to be unwatchable. It's going to be horrible. It's, and I hope that they found it to be different.
Yeah. Well, and I want to talk about this in a little bit, but just the capacity, it was almost like Tarantino-esque. The two people sitting at a table, and now Tarantino might do it for like 10 minutes. It's incredible. But this film, other than a few sort of scenes jumping away, it's effectively, there's like a good hour and a half of just conversation at a table, and it's riveting. Everyone I know who has seen this, who isn't like sort of a progressive critic out there who's trying to take a shot, but everyone I've personally talked to who's seen this film has absolutely loved it. On that note, though, I have heard things out there. In fact, the theater I saw it at, I know the owner of the theater, and she got a bit of hate mail for daring to show this film. It is a little bit contentious. And did you suspect, perhaps sort of leading into this when you checked out the script, having a potential demon, I'm not going to give anything away, but a potentially possessed individual, sort of rejoicing at some of the progressive sacred cows like euthanasia, abortion. Did you think that might rub some folks in Hollywood the wrong way?
No, I didn't think it would. I absolutely 100% knew it would. I mean, these are taboo subjects. You can't discuss, something that they call reproductive health care. I don't even know what that term means because it really doesn't represent what we're talking about, but you can't discuss that. And you certainly can't even say that you think that term doesn't fit the act. So yeah, there's a lot of things in it that I knew would move certain people in the wrong way. 100%. You'd have to be asleep at the wheel not to forecast that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So you knew that going in and decided to do it nonetheless. That's bold. I kind of wanted to ask you, and given that we're talking about films, if you look at a movie like, say, American Psycho, it's kind of a look at the life of this sociopath, Patrick Bateman, but really it's a critique of sort of superficiality and excesses in the 1980s. How much is this film, while it's taking a look at the Wayne Brady character, how much is it in fact a criticism of our culture at large and those things that are perhaps now excesses within our culture?
I mean, a large portion of it. It's making fun of, the whole film is about, 10 years ago we were circling the drain. Right now we seem to be teetering on the precipice of going into the drain. And it's very unapologetic about that. And I don't think I don't think the film is political in nature. And I'll give you an example. It's the political aspect of reproductive health care is whether or not it should be legal. But Nefarious in the movie, it has nothing to do with whether it's legal. He's just stipulating exactly what it is. You know, when you rip a child to pieces inside its own mother's womb, it's murder. And whether or not you want to do it or not, that could possibly be your own decision, or it could be the government's if you do make it political. But the whole conversation had nothing to do with politics. It was just him reaching across the table and saying, "This is what you're doing. This is what happens on a daily basis." You can choose not to acknowledge it or give it another title, but it is what it is.
I've done a lot of pro-life sort of apologetics in the past, and during that scene, I was sort of leaning over to my wife and nodding like, "Oh God, this is so good." For folks out there who haven't seen this movie, I really want to encourage you. It tackles things that you wouldn't expect anyone would touch or tackle, and it goes straight into them in brutal detail. So I encourage you to check that out. One of the things that really struck me, and we talked a little bit earlier about how it's this sort of symposium-like back and forth dialogue for the entirety of the film with a few sort of cuts jumping away from that. But how much detail sort of went into the sort of philosophy? You don't really see films where conversation is the anchor and the driving force behind a film anymore. And was that sort of a conscious decision as a juxtaposition to lots of the other sort of action films and action-driven content that you see out there?
You know, when I'm handed a script like this, if somebody were to tell me, "Hey, I'm going to give you a script that takes place at a table for 85 of the 90 pages," I would, I would still read it and give it all my consideration. But walking into that, it seems that's going to be a daunting task to pull off. But again, Chuck and Carrie, I'm not kidding. They're two of the best writers I've ever had the opportunity to work with. And the inauguration of my career, I was working with George Lucas and Steven Spielberg on Young Indiana Jones. So I've worked with some very, very, very credible writers, and I think that they are, bar none, two of the best I've ever had the experience to bring their words to life. And when I read it, I realized this dialogue can be kept afloat. I'm not saying it would be kept afloat easily, but this can be pulled off if executed correctly.
And I'm sure you've heard the comparisons out there to sort of C.S. Lewis, who I consider like one of the very best screw tape letters. That's sort of like meddling, bureaucratic, exegetical dialogue that was just so perfectly carried out in this. It's rare for me to compare something to C.S. Lewis, but as a testimony to the writing, I'm making the comparison. It really was incredible. On the next note of that, and talking a little bit about screw tape letters, this sort of accuracy of the depiction of demonic possession. There's been some great sort of possession-focused films, but they're very sort of sensationalized, or they're about the sort of physical action. They border on slapstick. This was psychological in nature. Sort of what went into your process? What went into the filmmaking process to create this atmosphere?
I think I'm a little bit of a different actor. I don't go to any dark place. The majority of my research is contained in between fade in and fade out. And the more well executed a script is, the less you have to do outside research. And I'm not joking when I say that I did none. I read the script. I came into this world as a believer. I've been to church. I said blessing at almost every meal. I talked to God before I lay my head on a pillow. I did what was on the page. It was very, very meticulously manicured, that script, down to the syllable. And for me, if a script is that well written, it is an instruction manual on how to design a character. And I just kind of did what they wrote to the best of my ability. If you're on a train and you see somebody reading a book, sometimes you'll see their face doing things that they're unconscious of because they're having an emotional experience. They're wrapped up in a story. I do the same thing with scripts, man. If it's that well written, I don't really believe it. I don't think I'm that person, but it's very easy to get caught up in the emotion, and your body will do things that your intention probably could fall short of.
Yeah. Well, I think probably Nefarious wouldn't be too happy with your humility. I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit, because I objectively think that if this wasn't a Christian conservative thing, and as those are two things that Hollywood wouldn't necessarily abide, I think that you'd undeniably be probably up for an Oscar. The performance was exceptional, and everyone I talked to who has seen this is absolutely blown away by the depiction of the transitions that take place between an individual who's a serial killer who is basically becomes the victim of this other thing, despite the fact he's a serial killer. You managed to empathize. You're angry. You did an incredible job. So I do want to commend you. Not only did you take on this role, but you elevated the film. You did incredible work. So thank you so much for doing that. For folks out there who do want to see this, and particularly for me, who I want to buy it and watch it again, what's the best way to get out there, and when will it be available for folks to pick up?
I don't have that date offhand, but I know it's coming up pretty soon. You'll be able to order the Blu-ray, the DVD, Amazon or wherever DVDs are sold. And it's streaming everywhere right now. You can get it on Dish, you can get it on Apple TV, Amazon Prime, Roku, Vudu, Google Play, YouTube. It's not. I have AT&T On Demand, and it's not on that. So it's not absolutely everywhere, but if you want to watch it, you can find it. And I hope everybody does give it a look.
Awesome. Yeah, keep an eye out. I know sometimes for our Canadian audiences, we get things later. They're not quite there. There's always some delays. But do go support a local theater. I think that's the biggest thing. Do that if you can. And if you can get it on one of your local things, check it out. An incredible film. Sean Patrick Flanery, I want to thank you so much for joining me. It was a great pleasure. And again, thanks for doing that incredible film.
Anytime.
Well, it was a real treat to be joined by that true Hollywood star. I just wanted to take a moment to encourage you guys to consider supporting Rebel News. And one of the fun ways you can do that is by going to our store at rebelnewsstore.com. If you like that conversation, you might like some of our new shirts, like this shirt I'm wearing. We've got some incredible new Christian attire. They are printed on these really great fitting shirts. They're incredible quality. I absolutely love them. So it's a fun way. It's great too. We can see you out on the street. We recognize you. We say, hey, we have a conversation about the incredible shirt, why you chose these shirts. But again, just encouraging you to consider supporting this important work we're doing by chipping in and making a purchase at rebelnewsstore.com.